In the middle of a field, in the middle of Kansas, in the middle of the summer.
Familiar to folk audiences as a founding member of the female trio Red Molly. It is my pleasure and my delight to introduce Carolann Solebello.
I grew up in New York City in the 70s and 80s, and on the radio were bubblegum pop and later on disco and later classic rock. My parents listened to doo-wop and Motown. So this is what was in my head as I went off to college in the Bronx. And I remember hearing for the first time on Fordham University Radio, WFUV, where I went to school, the Indigo Girls and Suzanne Vega and Tracy Chapman. It was the time of the folk revival in the late 80s and early 90s in New York City, and I had never really paid attention to the sound of an acoustic guitar before. I played when I was a kid, and then I started playing again when I was in college, but this was the first time I'd really paid attention to the acoustic guitar as a solo instrument, and as something that was really warm and really kind of got right to my soul, and I wanted to write like that. I had a background in musical theater. After college, I spent some time in publishing and then worked 6 years or so doing musical theater around the country. And I found I was getting hired for kind of the same musicals over and over again, and a little bit of Shakespeare thrown in here and there, but I found what I was hired to sing and play in shows was not necessarily, and the parts I was hired to play were not necessarily expressing, you know, myself artistically. It was a wonderful career, and I'm really glad that I pursued it, but I felt the need to express more. And then I started getting hired because I could play the guitar and other instruments. I got hired for a show out in Kansas that required the cast to portray a singing family in the 1930s that traveled around doing gospel music. And so I fibbed to the producer, told him I could play the mandolin and the bass, which I had only rudimentary knowledge of. Showed up with my 12-string guitar and proceeded to get a crash course in bluegrass and Southern gospel music. That doesn't really go with my upbringing, but you know, I stopped worrying about authenticity, and I try to write what I need to write, what I need to say, and use the vocabulary that I learned that appeals to me. The vocabulary that appeals to me at this point in my musical journey is the musical vocabulary I learned in Tennessee and in Kansas, the country and bluegrass vocabulary. Attempting to straddle my two worlds when I write these days. I've got one foot in the country and bluegrass world, but my metaphors are starting to become more urban. That's where I live. I live here in Brooklyn, New York, and I have for nearly 2 decades now. This is my world. The sounds of traffic, the smells of the neighbors cooking in my building that holds 90-plus families. You probably hear a truck honking outside my window right now. We live on the 5th floor. It's a great project. I'm glad to be associated with such wonderful women songwriters. Bring it on!
When I met you, I was working where you were dropping cash. You liked my satin shoes and rented gown.